Welcome to January. I am super excited um, I'm super excited to be with you guys. You know, January is interesting to me just because in some parts of the country, it's the beginning of bee season, which is incredible, right? I mean, you know, for our northern friends or even central United States, I mean, this is still the depths of winter. But for, you know, Southeast Texas or Florida, southern Florida, areas along the Gulf Coast, you're already seeing a little bit of a pollen flow. So, you know, it's crazy how quickly that pollen flow starts after the first of the year in some areas. And then, you know, for beekeepers further north, you know, we're months away from much of a spring. So it's kind of an interesting time, and we're going to kind of touch on all of that as we get started here this evening. You know, we'll kind of be uh, chatting about what's going on in the far southern areas, and then what's going on a little bit further north. So before we get started, though, I want to address the elephant in the room. Some of you are probably have already seen this. We sent an email out earlier today. I believe it went out this morning. You've probably seen our new logo and our new name on the ads even before this webinar started. We are so excited about this. So if you haven't seen it yet, our Texas Bee Supply is now renamed to the Bee Supply. So it's still TBS. It's still got the same, you know, the same name, same acronym, sorry, TBS. And so we just changed one word. We changed Texas to the. And so I could explain all that. But I want to show you guys a quick message from the owners, myself and my dad, who own TBS. I'm going to show you guys a quick video that kind of explains our thinking. And for someone that just mentioned in the comments, yes, the logo, that bee logo is the same as Commercial Bee Supply, which we also own. So Commercial Bee Supply is geared more towards commercial beekeepers for the products we sell and the education we do. TBS is more geared towards small scale and sideline beekeepers, but we're the same owners, same company, just slightly different gear. So the bee is kind of a crossover between the two companies. So I'm going to just do a quick video message from my dad and I that kind of explains what's going on with this name change.
Hey guys, this is Blake with TBS.
And I'm Lyndon.
And you know, we were visiting lately and thinking back to when we first started TBS over 5 years ago now. And you know, I was a commercial beekeeper, and you know, just one day approached my parents and said, "Hey, you know, I think there's demand for a bee supply company. You know, you want to start a bee supply company?"
And we're like, "Sure, let's start a bee supply company." And
Yeah.
you know, I got a couple extra hours a week, and we could hang out in the store for a while, visit with some people.
Maybe somebody'd show up.
Maybe somebody show up. Yeah. And very quickly, I mean, we had a line out the door.
Yeah.
It's really surprising.
Yeah, we did not expect TBS to grow like it did. I mean, it was really just kind of a random idea and something we thought may or may not catch on, you know, and it caught on in a way that we never expected.
Yeah, and so we're super thankful for all of you guys, because that's what makes this work is your faithfulness in shopping with us. And really, since we didn't know if it was going to turn into anything or not, our real goal was just to treat people well, you know, to treat people the way we want to be treated when we go shopping at different places. And so we knew that we could do that, and so that was kind of set that out as our goal, and see if we could sell some products along the way.
Yeah, and you know, I always was passionate too about education and the ability to educate the beekeeping community and do that in a way that was cheap or free, and selling awesome quality supplies that we used in our own commercial beekeeping operation or our own hobby as well was a great way to fund that education. So and because we feel so close with all you guys, I mean, all of you as our customers, many of you were there that very first day, you know, or that very first year as we got started. And we want to just always be upfront and share exciting news and plans as they come along, because we care about you guys. And something we're super excited to share is we're changing our name. And it's not a huge change. We're changing it from Texas Bee Supply to the Bee Supply. And so it'll still be TBS as an acronym, but we are making that slight change from Texas Bee Supply to the Bee Supply, and that's going into effect now. It's something we've been preparing for quite some time. We've noticed, during COVID and as our products got better and more innovative, and we continue to push our customer service, we saw more and more customers want to order from us online from out of state, from outside of Texas. And so even though we've been a Texas-based, Texas-focused company, which is still our plan, we have seen an ever-increasing demand from outside of Texas as well. And so, we only have retail stores in Texas. We've got the Dallas area store, the Houston area store. We've got Austin opening in a couple months, which we're incredibly excited about. You'll see a lot to come soon on that. But we really want to be able to serve beekeepers through e-commerce outside of Texas as well. And we feel like having the Bee Supply as our name will do that. And we're tweaking our logo too. You'll see it around this announcement. It's a slight change, but we have a new cool bee that we're using in place of the state of Texas. But overall, quality products, innovative products, education have always been our guiding North Star for TBS. And we really want to build upon that in a way that can only come with ever increasing growth. And as we grow, we're adding more people to our education team. We're adding more people to our product development team to come up with better, more innovative products and better, more innovative educational material. We really want to be more localized. I mean, we get a lot of credit because we are Texas focused, but even in Texas, as we educate, I'm always struggling with, how do I educate people in North Texas and Southeast Texas? Because, there are 3 planting zones apart, and there's a huge difference in how you keep bees in Southeast Texas versus far North Texas. And so we've really been struggling through, how do we become even more localized in our education? And so we've got a lot of pretty cool things we'll be launching over the next couple of months, from webinars to educational material, booklets, etc., to be even more hyper-local in our education. And we want to start doing that in Texas and in surrounding states as well. And so, even as we grow inside Texas and a little bit outside of Texas, we want to become even better at what we're already known for.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So what you can expect from us in 2023, you're going to see the same people in the stores. When you call, same customer service folks. And when you do the chats online, all of our Texas-based people will still be serving you and helping you as a customer. And so we're pretty excited about the coming year and the years to follow. And we hope that you guys will come along with us as we continue to grow and to serve the beekeeping community.
Yeah, and our passion is focusing on you as a beekeeper and focusing on your bees and how we can help you in that journey. And we look forward to doing even more of that in the coming year.
It's going to be a good year.
Yeah, will be.
So there you go. That was hopefully slightly more succinct than I probably would have been if I was just rambling on trying to give you an explanation of everything. So that's some of our reasoning and thinking about why we're changing the name. And but nothing is really going to change as far as our customer service, product, et cetera. And, we haven't sold the business. We haven't taken on investors, none of that has happened. So just a slight tweak that we think will help us serve the broader beekeeping community a little more effectively, while still keeping a, huge focus on Texas. And I am so excited, and I'll stop rambling, but I am so excited about some of the educational and product-based applications that we have launching over the next quarter that will help us be even more localized. We're looking at some different styles of webinars like these that can even give more local information than we even do now. And so we're looking at ways to be even more practical, even more local, as we continue to grow. So we're pretty excited. Okay, so our monthly magazine, we've got some really cool topics this month. and I am going to let Sherry real quick jump on and share with us what is super exciting about the magazine and some of the snippets that she has for us.
Hey, everybody. Okay, so let's see what's in the magazine this month. Well, number one, I think everybody now knows that we have changed to the Bee Supply Monthly. So the January issue, it was the rollout of that. So we're excited about that. And with that, it's packed full, like every month. So we've got a few I want to mention real quick before I do the spotlight. Setting up bee yards and drifting. So Blake did setting up bee yards, I did drifting, both kind of piggyback each other. Great articles. Please go see that. Go read those. But my spotlight, like the screen there shows, I want to spotlight the this month's What's the Buzz by Lynn Jones, our monthly contributor, guest writer. It's about insulated hives, which is kind of timely because James and I are going to be doing a presentation a little later on in this program about woodenware, and insulated hives is going to be part of that. So real quickly, this is cool stuff. So she gets into great details, page 30. So go in and read the whole thing, but I want to just hit some highlights. A colony surrounded by 5 inches of a tree trunk has an R value of about 5.6. Who knew that? I did not know that. An R value of 5.6 in a tree. That's crazy. When typically a Langstroth hive, which that's most common, and most of us have, has an R value. Are you ready? 1. So a tree far out performs for R value on the insulation factor of a regular Langstroth hive. So the article goes on, and of course it leads to the introduction of the Apimaye hives, the insulated hives that were built for that, for hot and cold weather, are incredible. And she goes into very good detail about it. Increased interest, I think that's an understatement. Apimaye hives are made of HDPE, which is high density polyethylene with UV protection, and have an R value, are you ready? 6.93. So it totally whips the Langstroth hive, but look what it does to even the tree insulation. It is absolutely the top of the mark on that. Down, go a little further, both winter and summer using an insulated hive cover should be the first course of action. In winter, 75% of the heat is lost through the top. So let's just say maybe we are lucky enough to have an Apimaye hive that does come with the insulated cover, but what if we're not, and we've got just a regular Langstroth? She goes into detail of how to insulate just the top, and we could all learn from that, because with the heat loss 75%, I can adapt my bee yard for little money by her recommendations in the article. So that's a teaser. You can go in and read that article and learn a few things. Page 30. So enjoy. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry. So yeah, some super cool articles. I really enjoyed listening to reading that article. It was really cool. So okay, so let's keep on rolling here. A couple quick notes before we jump into our normal material. We still have some bees for sale. We have a couple more weeks open for bee sales. We still have our 2022 pricing in effect, so we haven't raised our prices yet. We're trying really hard not to raise them at all. And so even though costs are up across the board, we are working really hard not to raise prices, period. We can't promise that's not going to happen, but they haven't gone up yet. But we're trying not to raise them at all. But we do still have some dates available for bees. Other things going on, yes, Austin. So our Austin area branch is going to open in February. So it'll be located in Round Rock, which is a little bit different. We had some significant issues with the property that we purchased near Elgin, And I say it wrong every time. I'm sorry if you're from the Austin area. I always get it confused between Elgin or Elgin. Um, so we had bought property out there. We had started the construction process, and we had several major issues come up. And that's kind of why the Austin store is so far behind schedule. But we ended up having to abandon for now that location, and we have found a new location in Round Rock, and that will be opening in, knock on wood, early February. So about a month from now. It may end up being more like mid-February that will be opening up in February. So kind of jumping in about so I'm actually at the American Beekeeping Federation conference in Jacksonville, Florida tonight. So I'm at that conference all week this week. And so I'm presenting from the ABF conference. And so we have a booth here at the American Beekeeping Federation conference. And then some of our staff also have a booth over at the Hive Life conference in Tennessee. They're both conferences are running concurrently. And so I don't have a live in the bee yard tonight. Number one, because there really wasn't much to show you in January live in the bee yard. And then secondly, because I'm in Florida. I should have gone and found a local beekeeper in Florida and done live in the bee yard in Florida style. But it was pouring down rain this week. So, but I do have some cool videos to show later on from some guest speakers. But about 30 minutes before this webinar started, I get this picture sent to me by a friend in California. So this is some of our bees that have already made it to California for almond pollination. And if you guys have been watching the weather, it has been absolutely pouring down rain in California, which is great because California really needed the water. And it looks like it's going to rain nonstop for the next 2 weeks. If you're a beekeeper, it's terrible timing because this is the time of year when we're all heading out there to put our bees into the almond orchards because, you know, virtually every commercially managed beehive in the country goes to California to pollinate the almonds this time of year. So there's a mass migration of all the bees in the country, more or less, to California to pollinate the almonds, which is great for the bees because it's an early pollen flow. You know, most of the country, there is no pollen flow this time of year. And so they get an early pollen flow, they build up really well, and then they're done by March. And so they're able to come back to wherever they are, wherever they normally are, and then we're able to split them, etc. But so it's raining an unusually large amount. This was one of the holding yards that our bees went to, and the water got unbelievably high. This like never happens. That's how much it's raining. You know, I've never seen this happen. But these are just some pictures that they sent me. That most of the hives are fine. There's about 1,000 hives in this holding yard waiting to go into the orchards because it's too wet to get in the orchards. And the edge, as you can see, these beehives kind of on the edge of this holding yard, there's a canal right here that overflowed and kind of flooded up to these hives. Now, surprisingly, you know, these beehives should be perfectly fine. You know, you've got water kind of over the entrances, but it's cold. It's, you know, 50 degrees, so it's not too cold. And I've got a guy heading out there to move these hives, and the bees should be just fine. The real danger when you have flooding like this, number one, if it gets too high, the whole pallet of bees will just float away down the river. That's not good. But if that water stayed up over those entrances and it got hot outside, then the hive can actually suffocate. So if it got up to 65, 70 degrees even, and those bees don't have any ventilation because it's sealed off over that entrance, then those hives, they wouldn't drown, but they would suffocate unless there was a crack in the lid that they could ventilate. So that's our main concern in a situation like this. There was one time, and then I promise we will get into practical beekeeping in just a minute. But there was one time where we had a bee yard in Southeast Texas, and they got about 6 inches of rain in one night. And we knew it rained. The bee yard we had didn't usually flood, so we weren't that concerned. And we showed up at that bee yard about a week after the rain. There was no water in the bee yard, but the beehives were all dead. And the bee yard was dry, and there was just, you would open up the hives, and they were healthy hives. They were 2 boxes packed full of bees, honey supers on top, and the bees were all just dead. And it took us a minute to try to figure out what happened, because it was so unusual to have an entire bee yard of bees dead. And then we started looking, and then we saw on the boxes, you could see where there had been a line of water. And what had happened is it had rained, the water had come up over the entrances, and the next day the water stayed up over the entrances. The sun came out and it got up to 80 degrees. All those bees suffocated in the hives. The water receded and went away by the time we came back to the beehives, and it had killed all the bees, and the water disappeared. So it took us a minute to realize that it happened. So if you ever can't move your bees, and this has happened to us before, if your bees are somewhere where you can't move them and the water does get up over the entrance, the key is that you crack all the lids open so that those bees can escape out the top or ventilate the hive at least. So it happens, unfortunately, in the bee world. So anyway, if anyone's interested in coming out to California and playing in the mud, let me know. It's quite an experience, and it'll be very interesting this year with all the rain they're getting 30, 40,000. We'll be putting 30 to 40,000 hives in the orchards, and it'll be a bit muddy. So okay, let's talk about beekeeping and what's going on in the month of January. And I every single year for this webinar, I dig around my yard until I find a dandelion, and so I can say, hey, here comes spring. Those dandelions, if you're in the southern U.S., especially Texas, those dandelions will come up almost in any conditions. And so, lots of areas where you get this occasional dandelion coming up, you'll have a little bit of pollen coming in. It'll be a very little bit, but on warm days that are above 55 and the bees are flying a little bit, you'll see a couple bees coming in with a tiny bit of pollen. These are some of the earlier blooms that I expect to see in the South. I don't know where this clover plant came from on the far left. That's wildly out of season. The yellow bush here, or plant here in the middle, is a mustard, wild mustard. That tends to bloom early. It's a fantastic early pollen and nectar source. I'm not really seeing much of this yet. I usually see it more towards the end of January in Texas, or into February in other southern states. Dandelions, of course, are starting now in much of Texas and along the Gulf Coast especially, and they'll progressively they'll march north as the early spring progresses. The henbit on the far right is blooming a little tiny bit in some areas, but we're still across the country. We're still waiting on our major pollen flows. They really haven't started, with the exception of Florida. So where I am right now, the maple is really kicking in and blooming. But for the rest of the country, we're waiting on the willow, we're waiting on the elm, we're waiting on a variety of things to start blooming to really kick off our primary pollen flow. And for most areas, that hasn't started yet. I wanted to share this with you. I put this together recently, and it's one of the many map-based tools that we're really working on at TBS. And we're going to be creating these maps in even more detail than this for a lot of different aspects of management and beekeeping, because it varies a lot depending on where you are in the country. And so you can see this is when significant pollen flows start across the country. So, if you're in, Southeast Texas or Central Florida, or the Valley of California, your primary pollen flow, or a significant pollen flow, starts between the 5th and the 25th. of January every year. You know, Central Texas through Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, on up to the Carolinas. You know, February 1st through February 15th is when we see our major pollen flow begin. You know, and so you can kind of go through and see the colors here. You know, our poor friends up in the Dakotas, you know, up in that pink area up against Canada, you know, they don't see a significant pollen flow until, you know, mid to late May. So this will be helpful. Now there's about a 2-week range there because it can really vary by a couple of weeks depending on the year. I certainly can't give you a specific date because every year is a little different, but in general, it's pretty stably starting in that 2-week period in those regions. Now, there are exceptions to this, but it's pretty accurate. And again, I'm talking about a significant pollen flow. Lots of areas are seeing some bees come in with some pollen on them from dandelions, et cetera. But you know, when the primary pollen flow begins and often doesn't end, is on these dates. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. And like I said, we're actually taking this map and we're drilling down all the way to the county level. And so we're refining this to where you can even in the future type in your zip code, and this will be an online tool, and see the specifics for your county. And we're doing this for pollen flow, honey flow, when you should split bees, when the pollen flow ends every year, on a number of different things. So that's a resource and a tool that we're working on to be even more local. Because I mean, like I mentioned in the name change video, if you look just at Texas, I mean, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, down here in the valley, 5 different regions of what's going on in the beekeeping world based on climate. So based on that, I mean, current conditions, we're beginning the roller coaster. You know, if you're in those southern states, you know, longer days are here. And so brood rearing has begun in a lot of areas because we're getting longer days now. There's still little to no pollen, like I mentioned, in most regions. You know, we had a really intense cold snap a couple of weeks ago, for almost the whole country, as all of you noticed, I'm sure. And that certainly did kill a lot of smaller, weaker hives, no doubt. And so that's always unfortunate to see. It's also fairly normal that we see those cold snaps come through and you know, wipe out some of those smaller hives. So that's did happen, unfortunately. Again, regions are going to vary greatly in January. So the key is watch your bees. When are they start bringing in pollen? Do they start brooding up? And that's the real telltale sign that your spring is actually beginning. Winter feeding, not going to spend a lot of time on this. I mean, your goal is to, actually, I'm going to skip that one. We're going to come back to that one in just a minute. If you're feeding syrup, you're going to try to maintain in southern states. Again, I'm working on a map that will do this for all states, but you know, talking about Texas primarily and southern states, you know, you're going to try to maintain about 20 pounds of food stores through January. You can feed syrup if you're in an area that has days above 55, 60 degrees. You'll be able to give them a little bit of syrup. You know, use a division board feeder or top feeders rather than entrance feeder. And then especially, you know, January through March, just keep an eye on as the weather warms up, pollen starts coming in, the bees start rearing brood, they are going to start burning through food stores at a much faster pace than they did the rest of the winter, because they're not going to be bringing in much nectar. Most plants that bloom early in the season are more pollen producers than nectar producers. And so the bees in most cases are going to be bringing in a lot of pollen. They're going to be growing very rapidly, but not bringing in much nectar, you know, and so they're going to be burning through those food stores as it starts warming up. And a lot of people think a lot about their bees and their food in the winter, but stop thinking about it as much when they see flowers blooming and winter starts ending. But really, that's when we pay the most attention to food stores. So February, March, April, that's when you really got to watch those food stores. Some beekeepers are, there's a lot of different kinds of beekeepers, and some beekeepers are really hands off. They want to they want to keep their bees as naturally as possible, and they don't like to feed unless they have to, and they'd rather not treat for mites, and they want to just leave their bees be, and that's fine. That's okay. Other beekeepers really want to manage their hives to maximize the population so they can split more or make more honey, and really try to manipulate their hives to again maximize what that hive can do. If you're in that box, if you're really wanting to maximize the strength of your hive, then here's what I'd recommend. 1 to 2 weeks before your major pollen flow begins, so thinking back to that map, 1 to 2 weeks before your major pollen flow begins, start feeding small amounts of 1-to-1 syrup when possible. So you don't need to feed a ton, but if you have a division board feeder, that internal feeder, go give them a half a gallon of 1-to-1 sugar water. When you've got a warm day that's 55, 60 degrees, put a pollen patty on each hive, a high protein pollen patty, global is what I'd recommend. And on warm days, open feed pollen substitute powder. Ultra Bee is a great option for that. And so it's all about feed. I mean, what you're going to do is you're introducing small amounts of feed, and the bees are going to start building up a little bit sooner. You're going to kind of kickstart that queen into production a little early, and then 2 weeks later, hopefully your major pollen flow begins, and then they'll really go crazy. But giving them some of that pollen substitute, giving them some of that pollen powder and some feed a couple weeks early will help them build up that much faster. It's not necessary. You don't have to do that. If you're not trying to make a bunch of splits or trying to make a ton of honey, it's not critical. It's not a life or death thing for your bees. But if you're trying to maximize it, that's what I'd recommend doing. If you do open feed, it works really well whenever there is no natural pollen available. And so it can, one of the biggest reasons I like doing some open feeding of pollen substitute is because it can help discourage bees from being a nuisance. If your neighbors are complaining that your bees are getting into their chicken feed or their sawdust in their garage, or if your neighbors are complaining about your bees in the winter, open feeding the pollen substitute gives the bees something else to do than bug your neighbors. So it can be helpful. It can help stimulate brood rearing in January. It's not critical. Open pollen feeding, my favorite is using the Pro Nook box. Just tear off this little yellow entrance completely, and you can put a couple pounds of pollen substitute in there, and the bees will rob it, and that way it stays nice and dry even if it rains. If you go online, there's a million different contraptions people have come up with to open feed pollen substitute. You can use buckets, you can buy pollen feeders. There's all different ways. The key is that it just stays dry and has ample access for the bees. Now, when we do this commercially, we get a 55-gallon barrel and just lay it over on its side and dump a 50-pound sack of pollen substitute in the barrel and in one of our bee yards, and they'll eat it like in a day or two if it's a big bee yard. So that it can be as simple as that. So if anybody wants some 55-gallon barrels and you're anywhere close to our honey packing facility in Blue Ridge, Texas, come on by. We've got about 3,000 55-gallon barrels that we don't know what to do with. So let me know. Pollen patties, like I said, it can help early brood rearing in January. The other thing as we kind of look forward to spring is that I don't feed pollen patties much this time of year. I do a little bit, but to help boost up my bees. But the other thing I watch for is if we get an extended cold period of 7+ days after my bees have really ramped up brood production, then I am going to throw a pollen patty on there. Because if your bees have 5 frames of brood and you get a cold snap that lasts for a week and the bees can't go out and forage on pollen, they're going to use up all the pollen in the hive, and they may start cannibalizing that brood in the hive. So that's the other time in the spring when I would put in a pollen patty is if I've got that week of cold weather when my bees already have a lot of brood. A couple other things that we're going to touch on before we go to James and Sherry in a little bit is my hive queenless, or is it not raising, or are they just not raising brood yet? And that can be a little tricky, you know, as we go towards spring and you start, you know, on maybe on those warm days, you pop open your hive and you pull out a frame to look at everything, you know, you don't see any eggs or larvae. Is that cause for concern or not? So here's some key things to keep in mind as you start doing those late winter inspections. We're still not quite there yet, but you know, we're getting close. So things to keep in mind. Is there a pollen flow, and does your hive have food stores? So if there is zero pollen flow, zero natural pollen flow, and you haven't been feeding them any sorts of substitute, I'm not really going to expect to see eggs or larvae. If they're incredibly low on stored honey or syrup, I wouldn't expect to see larvae or eggs. If the weekly temperatures are consistently below 40 degrees during the day, I'm not really expecting to see eggs or larvae much. The other thing is, did you see eggs and brood during the fall? If you did see eggs and brood going into the winter, the odds that queen just randomly died in the winter is pretty slim. The next thing to think through is population. You know, if your hive is 2 deep boxes full of bees, or even a deep box full of bees, I'm going to expect to see brood much earlier than I would a really small weak hive. You know, if you've got a hive that's 3-4 frames of bees right now, I would certainly not expect to see brood in them. I wouldn't expect to see brood until you have a strong natural pollen flow. The other thing to think through is if you see brood, do you see brood in your other hives? You know, if you've got other hives of a similar strength that have 2 or 3 frames of brood, and you have a hive that doesn't have brood, that's a sign you probably did lose your queen. So those are some things to kind of think through as you're doing those early winter or late winter inspections. I don't usually see a lot of hives just lose their queen over the winter. It's fairly unusual. So 9 times out of 10, when people reach out and say, oh my goodness, I think I don't see brood in my hive, I think it's queenless this time of year, it's just too early, or there's no pollen flow, or it's too cold, or maybe the population is too small. But most queens successfully overwinter in the vast majority of cases. Something else you might see as you start getting into later winter, depending on where you are, you may have hives, you will have hives that die. And you may notice this mold build up on the frames. And the center picture here is what I see a lot of, you know, where after cold snap comes through, you might have had a hive that was really small and they died. And you kind of get this blue or white mold fungus buildup on the frames, especially if there was a leak in the hive and some water got in there. You may see that. The good news is it's okay. It's not going to damage anything. What I do is, depending on how bad it is, I often just store it somewhere dry and then put it back onto hives and they'll clean it up. You can scrape the dead bees off. You can rinse those frames out, shake all the water out, put them somewhere where they're really going to dry, and then reuse them. But just because your frames got moldy does not mean that it's going to harm your bees in any way. There's not really a lot when it comes to comb that makes me not put it back onto my bees unless it just has excessive wax moth damage. You know, if you've got a frame that's half destroyed with wax moths, then I'm not going to reuse that. I'm going to throw it away. Other than that, the only time I really throw away comb is if it's really old and dark, you know, black, super old comb, then I would call it out, throw it away, and replace it with some fresh stuff. But that's, you know, we're talking 10-year-old comb that I would do that on. One other thing to watch for this time of year as our bees fly out during warm days and go back in is what's normal to see as far as bee death versus abnormal. This picture on the right here, I would say is very normal. You know, when you get a warm day and the bees can fly a little bit, they will definitely haul out the bees that have died during those cold snaps and throw them out the front door. So seeing a couple dozen dead bees on the front of a hive like this is very normal. You know, those older winter bees are starting to die. That's normal. Oops. What I would not want to see is this picture on the left where you just see piles, you know, hundreds of dead bees. That's more concerning. That indicates starvation, major death due to cold, perhaps. Sprays, you're not really gonna have spray issues this time of year, but if I'm seeing this on my bees, I think they probably had a starvation event or a major freeze event that caused that many bees to die. So I want to jump to Jamie Ellis really quickly. He has, I think I love this bit of wisdom he has, which is just the most, as we think about bee death, you know, he has, I think, some great insight on the most important things to know in beekeeping to help keep your bees alive. I think he did a really good job of just summarizing the most important things to keep in mind as a beekeeper. So I am going to get this transitioned over here. Bear with me for just a moment as I do this. All right, here we go. Sorry guys, hang tight. Let me get him on here. There we go. It's usually a crazy smooth transition, but not so this time. There we go. It's going to be a little loud when I hit play, so as it buffers, so you might want to turn your volume down a little bit.
I get asked regularly, what are the most important aspects related to bee management? If a new beekeeper is starting off, what's the most important thing that they can know? Heck, for that matter, if it's a commercial beekeeper, what's the most important thing he or she needs to know about keeping bees? Well, I think we have a lot of resources now and a lot of data that have suggested a few basic things. Surveyed beekeepers across the US have reported 4 kind of major stressors that their bee colonies face. And in no particular order, one of them is bad weather. So climate related issues, you know, drought, too much rain, too much wind, etc. Another's varroa, another's nutrition, and another's queen quality. Now we can do very little to control weather, right? We're all at the mercy of where we keep our bees. So if we excise out weather, that leaves us 3 things that all beekeepers are going to have to learn to manage appropriately: queen quality, varroa populations, and nutrition. So in my opinion, the most critical management aspects of taking care of bee colonies is learning how to address varroa populations adequately, making sure that you have a queen in your colony that is robust, long-lived, quality offspring, etc., and making sure to recognize when your colony has nutritional issues and know how to address it. In fact, I'm such a firm believer that those are the most important management aspects related to bees and beekeeping. When at the University of Florida, we do a lot of beekeeper training, queen quality, so spotting queen issues and addressing them, knowing when varroa populations are high and addressing them, and being able to spot nutritional issues and addressing them. All 3 of those things feature prominently in the training that my team and I offer at UF, because I'm such a firm believer that they're important things for beekeepers to know. In my opinion, if you can do those things, if you can spot when those 3 things are troubling in a colony and know how to remedy it, or better yet, know how to head it off at the pass, you address these things before they're a problem, beekeeping is going to be enjoyable for you and your colonies will be productive. Of course, there are other stressors, right? There's other viruses and nosema and beetles and drought. Perhaps there's pesticide exposure. Maybe there's management related issues. Yes. All of those things can cause problems as well. But in my opinion, if we can take care of what I call the big 3, grow a queen's nutrition, most of the rest of beekeeping will be a lot easier at the end of the day.
Awesome. I really love that. I mean, I always appreciate anything that Jamie Ellis shares, but yeah, I always find his summary of the most important things to keep in mind just super helpful. So thank you to Dr. Ellis. So looking at hive inspections, you know, as you kind of look into your bees on those warmer days, here's what I would expect to see. Minimal but increasing brood. And again, this varies quite a lot depending on your region. You know, some areas in Southeast Texas and along the Gulf Coast, you know, already have 2 or 3 frames of brood. You know, North Texas, Central Texas, we might have 0 to 1, you know, and then north of that may have none at all. So it does vary a bit. You might have a little bit of pollen stores, but not much. And you want to make sure you've got at least 20 pounds stored in that second box. So I'm going to go to our last little video before we get to the Elams here is from Tara Chapman, who's a phenomenal beekeeper, and she has a kind of a different viewpoint on winter inspections, which I really appreciate. I mean, I always enjoy, you know, sharing when I can a variety of viewpoints, and I really like Tara's as she talks about winter inspections and in a slightly different way than many of us think about them. So I'm going to jump to her really quickly, and here we go.
About winter hive inspections. My answer might be a little different from others, but know that I tend to be one that doesn't baby her bees. I'm a much more hands-off beekeeper, even though this is my full-time employment. I support a team of 6 off of this. We're a little bit more hands-off. So unless there is a concern that we have about a hive, or most importantly, they don't have enough food to make it through winter, we don't actually do winter hive inspections. And so for us, we winterize about around Thanksgiving. It kind of depends on the weather, but usually by Thanksgiving, we've tried to winterize most of our hives. And then we're not getting back in those hives until at least January, maybe February. So we'll get in earlier if we've had a bit of a warmer winter. We'll delay it if we've had a bit of a colder winter. So if we do have hives that we are worried are a bit light, meaning they don't have enough honey to make it through, we'll come out and we will pop in the hives to mountain camp feed, which mountain camp feeding is just basically a method of feeding dry sugar on top of the hive. But I don't do a lot of digging around in hives this time of year. Our queens are, even in a warmer winter, are going to start and stop laying in spurts. So there's a good chance you're not going to see any brood. So there's not a lot to look for there. If you were to go queenless, you probably wouldn't know for sure anyway because of that. And you can't get a queen in Texas right now. Right? So there's not a lot going on. And I don't like to be breaking their propolis seals, because if we do have a colder winter, right, it's really important that they have those seals to keep the hive warm. So I just don't like to meddle. If they've got plenty of food, I tend to just leave them alone. Otherwise, I'm popping in just real quickly and adding some dry sugar on top to mountain camp feed. And then I'll break in, in January or February of the next year. It gives the bees a break. It gives the beekeeper a much needed break. And that's what works for me in my yards.
So thank you. Yeah, I love that. And I kind of, I mean, I agree with that in that, there's really not a lot we can do in the winter time. There's not a lot we should necessarily be doing. I find a lot of times when I'm doing winter inspections, it's to satisfy my own curiosity as much as anything else. And usually the bees are just fine. So I'm just peeking in there just to make sure I feel okay. Nothing dramatic's changed. And I like how Tara mentioned, she called it, which she's the first one I've heard reference it as this, which I think is cool. It's a mountaintop feeding where they you basically just open the lid, and if your bees need food, you can put down some newspaper and then pour a couple pounds of sugar, granulated dry sugar on top, and put your lid back on. And then your bees can kind of come up and eat that sugar throughout the winter. It's the same concept as like a sugar brick. It's just a little cheaper, faster way to feed some granulated sugar. It doesn't have all the nutrition that the sugar brick has, but it's still a cool way to do some kind of quick and down and dirty feeding when they need it. So combining in January, you know, a couple of notes is if you're interested in combining any of your weaker hives in January, gauge the strength on a warmer 60-degree day. If you go out there and it's 35 degrees and take a quick look at your bees, they might look like they're only 4 frames of bees, but they could be clustered so tight that they might actually be 8 frames of bees. So, if you have a hive that's 2 frames of bees or less, you can go ahead and combine them. They're probably going to freeze on some of these cold nights. But honestly, I don't do a lot of combining in January. It's like if they've made it this far, let's just see if they can make it all the way to spring. So I tend to do all my combining in fall and leave them alone this time of year. So okay, so that's the basic tips. I'm really excited. I asked James and Sherry to talk about Woodenware. Now that might seem like, Woodenware, but they're really going to be talking about insulated hives versus uninsulated hives. They're going to be talking about 8-frame equipment versus 10-frame equipment, and 1.5 versus double deeps versus single story hives. And so they're going to be tackling a lot of more technical details on Woodenware, not just, hey, this is a deep box, this is a lid. And so I'm eager to hear what they have to say. And then we'll jump and answer some more of your questions at the end. But I'm going to go ahead and launch this and get them rolling.
Thanks, Blake. All right, everybody ready?
Yeah, hi everyone.
Okay, so we got in our list of projects this month, we wanted to talk about Woodenware. And it's not just Woodenware. It's kind of your bee's house. It's like our house, right? So here in front of you, I chose a picture that's kind of a hodgepodge. That's a little bit laughable when we look back at that. That was a few years ago, wasn't it?
It was, but a common denominator that's there, that's important not only to our bees, but to us as well. It kind of flows uphill and downhill, is that bees require a dry home. So regardless of what type of Woodenware or what type of hive body that we're using for our bees, it must be dry inside.
It's gotta be dry. Gotta be dry, like we've had some rain.
And that addresses
and warm.
one of 3 primary issues. Our bees have to be dry.
Mm-hmm.
Our bees have to have the ability to be inspected without damaging the hive. That's where the Langstroth hive bodies come in that we see here, and also the other ones that we'll be talking about tonight. But the pest and disease resistance comes in there. And even the third of nutrition comes in, that we're not controlling nutrition, but we are providing storage space. So we'll go into all of those as we look at our hives. That was a lot.
That was a lot.
Not parts done.
That's not true. Don't go anywhere. We got lots of work to do. All right, let me get my slides going. All right. Is it all it's stacked up to be? But then boom. Is that funny? I thought that was funny. I want everybody out there laughing.
That reminds me of some of the pictures that we see sometimes on the internet where you've got a brood box or multiple brood boxes and honey supers that go up into the sky. They're so tall.
There's a picture of Blake when he was about 14 that I've used. Right, Blake? You know which one I'm talking about. This is a great picture, and I started because this is just came out in the January issue of the Bee Supply Monthly magazine, and I love this because I don't know about y'all, but when we paint boxes, we're doing more than one. This is a few. I'm sure if you've had been in the beekeeping for a few years, you've had to get creative on how to paint more than one at a time. But I love that picture.
It shows the practicality of painting it, but it also shows that the inside of the boxes where our bees live are not painted. So it doesn't expose them to a life world of white paint.
I don't think they'd like that. You know, I put that picture there. I had no idea that's what he was going to say, but that was very good. That was very good. That was an instructional picture, not to just be funny. It's all it's cracked up to be, or is it all it's stacked up to be?
I like that.
All right, so let's talk about briefly. We're just going to go through the materials, okay? So pine, let's start with pine. And you mentioned this is just a Langstroth box. So we're talking Langstroth hives here first, all
Yeah,
right?
the pine box is by far the most common
Mhm,
box throughout the country. And one of the reasons is because it's very economical.
mhm.
It's easy to work with. The joints can be mitered to whatever you'd like, and it's
Mhm.
not just a box that you have to go, gosh, I've got to go to the bank and withdraw some money to buy some new
It's
ones.
not, it's affordable.
Nice, affordable. That's
It
a
is.
good word for
It
it.
holds up with good maintenance. And when I say that, it probably 5 to 7 years on it. But if you'll just mark your calendar and paint them every year, you're going to get that full gamut out of it. I bet you that we've got some older than that in play because
Sure.
we paint them and yeah, the paint's this thick on the
Mhm.
outside, but they're still holding up,
Well,
you know?
there are two things that occur in that, and that the pine boxes tend to break down more in the corners where we use our hive tools to
Mhm,
pry with.
mhm.
And there are boxes that are made of harder wood, more
Mhm.
dense woods that help overcome that, like cedar.
Yeah.
Good
That's
timing.
that was good. It's like, we didn't plan that. So 7 to 10 years ish on cedar. Cedar costs a little more than pine, but it is more durable and it does last longer, as I mentioned. But I think the kicker to cedar is that it's a little lighter weight. If you were to pick up a pine box and then a cedar box right side by side, it's a little lighter weight.
You know, a cedar box that's stained or sealed, just like you can seal pine as well, but
Mhm.
a cedar box, especially when it's sealed,
Put a garden top
Oh, so pretty.
hive up cover on top of it.
and beautiful backyard beekeeping.
They're so pretty. You don't have to seal them. Some people like to let them go gray. If you've ever seen a cedar house that they didn't seal the outside of it, turns a beautiful kind of gray silver. So you can do that. You don't have to paint them. So let's go to the next one, April May hives.
That's another one that we don't have to paint
It
because
isn't.
it has a natural color.
That's called, what is it made of? HDPE,
HDPE.
high density polyethylene.
It is
April May is
growing in
a new
popularity.
method of bee housing, beehives that addresses every issue I know or that might be known to man
Mhm.
for keeping bees where we've had problems in the past. We've got the proper cover to
Mhm.
keep it dry.
Mhm.
We have ventilation, which is huge.
You do.
We have multiple entrances available. You can divide the hive in multiple
I know, that's
sections,
cool.
like keeping 2 nukes or
Uh-huh.
keeping a 6 frame, or there's just so much you can do with it. They are more expensive. That would be the drawback to it.
They are.
But if you want to experiment and kind of go high end in your beekeeping,
Mm.
it's a great consideration.
And cost is a factor here, but if you're just going to be a few hives, I say go for it. The longevity of it, who knows? I mean, we've only been exposed to them for a few years or a couple of however long. And I think that the longevity is there. They're going to last you a long time. So you might weigh it out. It might be the route you want to go. They're self-insulating. So because of the way that's built, there's a dead airspace in the inner core and the outer. So it's self-insulating, preventing extreme weather problems like we just are kind of going through from time to time now that it's winter. Moisture buildup, the way the lid is conformed, it actually wicks out, water drains out the moisture.
Isn't that interesting?
It does. It's pretty
It has like an
cool.
overhang.
It is.
It straps down or
It does.
latches
Ratcheted.
down. But
Yep.
There are attributes, but you do pay for those
You
attributes.
do. You do. It might be the Mercedes of it, but hey, whatever floats your boat, right? Top bars.
Top bars are cool. Top bars
They
are a regional way of beekeeping.
And not specifically within the country, but within various areas of the country.
Communities. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are areas in Texas that thrive on it. There are
Mhm.
areas scattered around the country
Mhm.
Where top bars are really
Very
fun.
popular.
They do conform to the things that we talked about earlier, where we have a dry outer cover. We do have removable frames inside. It's a very natural way of beekeeping. The same products that are made to build the other boxes are used to build a top bar hive, and that you can do cedar, you can do pine. You can do plastic, I suppose.
I don't think Apimac makes the top bar, but that may be coming.
Not yet.
They might be, they might be. The one thing I have the input on the top bar is that it's no lifting. It truly is horizontal beekeeping. So for those with wanting to put a check mark by that as far as weight, that one really does it.
Well, we'll go into that in detail when we talk about configuration.
One other thing about top bar, when you are keeping bees in top bar, honey extraction is completely different than it is in a Langstroth. Apis falls under, because it is, Apis is also a Langstroth, just FYI, because it's the same configuration, bee space and the dimensions and so forth. But honey harvest is different in top bar. So might look into that before, if you decide that you want to, and finding other people to help you out might be an issue, but that's all right. We'll talk about that a little bit more.
Well, that little girl has a project in front of her.
She
doesn't
does.
it? It's a great way to move bees.
It is. It is. So hive configurations, it typically is decided by how easily I can move things around. Lifting, so weight. If I am talking about how heavy something is, then I might think about which one of those that we just talked about on the last one and how I'm going to configure it. Ease of hive inspections, that top bar is pretty easy because it's all right there. You don't have to move boxes off. That's pretty cool.
We talked about just briefly several times now, hive inspections, how crucial they are, and that we do have to control our varroa. We do have to know how much honey we have in our boxes.
Right.
Our pests and disease are what keep our bees alive. The difference in successful beekeeping and unsuccessful beekeeping.
Right. And we don't have that little girl to help us move our hives. So it really, if you've got one of her, you've got it made. So, but how many hives you ultimately want in your bee yard? You want to have, what's your goal, ultimate goal, and the purpose? That's going to play a big role in how you're going to develop your configuration. So if you are out for honey production or bee production, that's going to influence that. And we're going to talk about that here in the next couple of slides.
Let's do that.
Let's do that. So my next slide, we've got a guest. We have a very, I'm going to say, important person.
High profile.
He is high profile. A while back, I interviewed Dr. Jamie Ellis. Whoops, sorry. And he shared his thoughts on hive configurations. So I'd like to share that with you, and let's listen to Dr. Jamie Ellis.
So I've been a beekeeper for about 30 years. I'm also a professor at the University of Florida. People always want to know my opinion about how I keep my bees. And I thought about this a lot, right? Should you use one brood box or two? Should you use mediums or deep? Should you use shallow? Should you use 8 frame or 10 frame? What's your hive configuration? That's kind of the lingo I use, hive configuration. Jamie, how do you configure your hives? Well, it is important that I tell you this and that you hear it clearly. There is no right answer to that question. Beekeeping is 90% fact and 10% art. The fact is bees swarm. The fact is varroa kill bees. The fact is viruses are bad. The fact is sometimes we need to feed, et cetera, et cetera. But the opinion is you can use excluders or not. You can use 8 frames or not. You can use styrofoam boxes or wood boxes. The truth is I don't care. That part is the 10% art. It's making beekeeping yours. So there's really no right answer to this question. So instead of telling you what I think is right, I'll just tell you what I do. I tend to use one deep box as my brood chamber. I use a 10 frame box. I use an excluder, and then I use a medium super, 10 frames. So my standard hive configuration is screen bottom board, deep Langstroth 10 frame box, metal queen excluder, medium super, and that medium super is their food super. It's what always has the honey necessary for the bees to survive year round. Now, a lot of people will in turn say, well, Jamie, if we use 2 brood boxes, we use 2 deeps for brood boxes, my queens can produce twice as much brood in our colonies that your queens can in yours. And I'm like, well, that's fine. But I have been able to manage colonies in a single brood box and a single medium super to be as strong as people who manage 2 brood boxes or 3 medium supers. So I'm more convinced that how you manage in those hive configuration is more important than what configuration you use. I'm pretty convinced that I can keep a single deep with a medium as strong as anybody can keep 2 deeps. So, to me, the argument's not that important. Well, essentially what you really need is you need at least the volume of a deep for brood. So a deep is about a medium and a half, or about 2 shallows. So if you elect to use shallows, you've got to use 2 of them for that 1 deep. Then you need about a medium super's worth of honey for them to survive throughout the year. So if you use 2 deep brood boxes, what you're going to see is that bees tend to put about 1 brood box worth of food in the bottommost box, maybe a little bit of, brood in the bottommost box. They might have a little bit of brood in the upper box, but then they're going to fill the rest of that with honey. That's about a medium super's worth of honey. So if you think about it strategically, it's not the configuration that's important, it's the volume. And the standard volume that has to get a colony through the year is about a deep box and a half, right? So about a deep box and a half. So that's about a deep and a medium, or 3 shallows, or 3 mediums, or 2 deeps. That's about the volume that they need. The bees will sort the rest out themselves. So again, I give you permission to use the hive configuration you want to use. Just for the sake of telling you, I use a deep and a medium year round.
Excellent. Thanks, Jamie Ellis. That's super.
Yeah, I like that. I love the 90% fact and 10% I interpret as fun. He said art, I say fun. That's where all the little trinkets and goodies in beekeeping come in that we find at the shows and on our website, and there's some good stuff there that did not exist a few years ago, but they're out there for us to play with. That's that 10%. And I love it when he answered the question, he said, right. And we all went, right, Jamie.
Well, I think what my best takeaway from that is it's really up to you. I mean, it's up to you and to me and to everyone else individually of how you do it and what works best for you. And it could be, geographically dependent on, that might be the deal, or just where you are or who you are. So it means we're all right, doesn't it? It means we're all right. So before you make the decision, let's go over a few things. So let's talk about all of his configurations he talked about and start with what he does, which is a single deep hive. And I have here, I'm gonna read, that's not always very entertaining, but this is this time, because I'm reading from an article this one wrote, James Elam wrote, for the April 2022 magazine. So if you want to, the whole article, go back to the website and pull up the free magazine and go to April of 2022, and it's called Managing Single Story Hives. And it truly is a great article. So good that I'm going to quote a couple of things. Single deep box management absolutely offers the opportunity to control the physical lifting aspects inherent to beekeeping. So we can put a big old check by that box, right?
The less boxes we have to lift, the easier we can manage our colonies.
Absolutely. Effective, this was a great note that out of your article, effective mite control is more easily attained as testing and treatments are primarily confined to a single box. And an added bonus, lower cost for treatments, as most require you double the dosing for each box. I didn't even think about that until you wrote that. That's, hey, I'm gonna call that another check, save money. Save money. A key factor for beekeeping in a single deep box is to focus on space. And I think that is really, and we talk about that, and we'll talk about that when we're talking about mediums too, but space is, bees outgrow their space. So that is obviously part of it. The queen, and this is a calculation statement. The queen cannot lay in more cells than there are available in any single brood chamber hive. That sounds obvious, but the amount of bees present can take up much more room than a single hive body can hold. So even if she's got room to lay and there's too many bees in that space, it's going to restrict her laying, right? So a single D brood box has approximately 3,500 cells per side on a frame. Multiply that 10 frames in a 10 frame box. That's 35,000 cells, give or take, opportunities for emerging and living bees. If most of that were used for brood rearing and not the storing of resources, it would allow the queen a revolving door of at least 30,000 cells. So his theory of it being enough space is right because of what I'm about to read, and he even said, is there's enough brood space in a single deep for a queen to lay effectively and efficiently. Where the space constraints come from are from the working bees and resources. So the solution is adding a second deep or adding a honey super or a medium. That's where he went with it. And so single deep hives, most always you would just plan on having that additional medium.
That medium allows for, and or deep, allows for the expansion and contraction
of
the bee
bees.
population.
That's right.
And really doesn't inhibit the storing of honey at all,
And
because we
that-
do have, as he was saying, a metal queen excluder in there.
We do. And that's your next statement. The queen must remain in that bottom box. Or, you know, even though Jamie Ellis said something about a little bit of brood in the top, we're going to leave that queen excluder on. Adding this super early in the population growth season will supply the bees with more room to move around, feeling less crowded, and open up the space for the queen to move freely, stopping the swarm sequence, which is a big deal, especially in spring. In turn, workers will continue to bring in resources, but instead of putting them in the brood box, they're putting them in the top box. That's good stuff.
Yeah, that's
right
some
there.
basic management of a single deep, and
Good stuff.
if done properly, you don't have a swarm problem.
You know, used to, in what they call the old world, it was very common
We weren't there.
to force bees to swarm to increase
Yes.
populations. But we don't do that anymore because
No.
bees are considered typically unhealthy once they swarm out of our box.
That's right. That's right. So now let's talk about double deeps. Double deeps is what most of us, and I'm gonna put us in that category, we actually have multiple configurations, but primarily for honey production, we run double deeps. Now there's somebody out there, I can hear them now, but I get just as much honey off my single deep as you do in a double deep. Well, maybe you do. And I'm not gonna argue that at all. But studies show, I didn't write the study, so don't shoot the messenger, that a double deep will yield more honey production simply because of more bees. You will develop more bees for probably about 60,000 when a single deep and a medium is going to get you right around 40,000, 45,000. But more bees, they gather more resources. So that's that's
Tradition means a lot to everyone in the world.
Yeah.
And your mentors may or may not teach you double deep.
Yeah. Whatever works.
But like Jamie said, whatever works. I did want to correct something that I implied and didn't finish up on. I said that the swarms are considered unhealthy when they leave our boxes. That's not true. I just mean their chance of survival goes down dramatically.
That's true.
So it's not, we don't encourage swarms.
Well,
But our bees, if we manage them properly, they're healthy. That's our goal.
it is, but I didn't question it because when they swarm, you run risks of things happening in the ones that stayed.
Yeah,
So
so the double deep wall, that's what we teach, is a very convenient way to keep bees.
Mhm.
But that top box is heavy, and that leads to what you refer to as bottom box neglect. Because it is so heavy, we're
Yeah.
intimidated to go down sometimes, especially as a new beekeeper.
That's true. But, double deep is more common, but that's, again, up to you. And the basic 80% full expansion rate goes with that. So we would go 2 or 3 deeps even at some time and before we've made splits and so forth. So that's double deeps. Now let's talk about all mediums. All mediums is growing in popularity. We have a lot of new students that come through our TBS classes that really are thinking this through and thinking about doing all mediums for keeping their bees.
A medium box being shorter in height
Mhm.
than a deep box,
Mhm,
logically, means that it's also going to weigh less.
mhm.
And weight is a big factor when on specific people.
The older we get,
yeah.
the older we get even.
Some things are hard to lift,
Yeah,
and it helps overcome that.
it does. The one, a couple of aspects about keeping all mediums, if you decide, and some of this is for beekeepers that you've been out doing bees for years, but maybe your lifting ability has changed, or maybe you weren't quite as successful in doing it either in singles or doubles or whichever of these you are currently using. We're trying to go through these so that you maybe can look into another way that might suit you better. So in all mediums, yes, it's lighter, but there's a couple of things you need to think about. When you go all mediums, stay all mediums in your brood boxes, in other words.
Isn't it a cumbersome event when you have a medium and a medium, there's your brood boxes,
Mhm.
and then you realize that you're out of, and you throw a deep on top of
Right.
it.
For a brood box.
And then all of a sudden we're mixing our frames.
Yeah.
And we end up with some deep honey frames and some medium honey frames.
Yeah.
And it becomes cumbersome.
Well,
So-
and brood frames, deep brood
Brood
frames
frames.
and deep and.
yeah, and we're raising our bees in medium. So focus, concentrate, try to restrict yourself to purchasing the
Stick with one.
destination that you want.
Yeah, stick with one, because especially when here early spring, which is not very far away, y'all, we're going to be talking, gosh, our February webinar, it's just a month away. We're going to be talking about expansion, right? As that season comes and you're all mediums, if I were to have mixed it, I can't take a medium that I had to because I didn't have enough. I took a deep frame. I need this box over here that are all mediums. I can't trade those back and forth. So think that through. And you will manage your populations carefully
Yeah,
on that.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I was going to say that is a consideration for a new beekeeper, and that don't just restrict yourself to buying what you specifically have to have
Mhm.
with that first nuke or that
Yes.
first single deep or that first double deep.
Buy
Because remember
extra.
that you've got spring coming up really
Yeah.
soon, and we're going to hopefully be expanding our apiary.
Yeah.
Naturally, bees are like rabbits,
Yeah.
I like to say.
Yeah.
So extra boxes are huge.
Always, always, always. All right. So now 8 frame versus 10 frame. We're
Jamie
very
talked about
He
that.
did. He did. 8 frame is a smaller space, duh, but it really is quite a bit smaller. So 2 frames. So we're looking at about that much. It's about 3 inches smaller. Your expansion room isn't as large as it would be for a 10 frame, but that's okay. It's a lighter weight box. Another thing about 8 frame that you need to think about is that internal feeders in the brood nest are kind of a no-no, because if you take away an internal frame feeder, takes up about 2 frames. If I take 2 frames away from that 8, I'm a nuke.
But I think in some configurations or some applications, that would really show its head, and that if I was trying to keep a single deep, like Jamie Ellis was talking about,
Mhm.
he didn't say do it in an 8 frame.
No, he
He said
didn't.
do it in a 10 frame.
Yeah.
Because if you are doing an internal feeder, you're trying to keep a nuke,
Yeah.
which that gets you to 6 frames or 5 frames. So think about it, and that's
Yeah.
where your mentor comes in
Yeah.
and says, good idea, bad idea.
Right. But 8 frames are great. And that's also very popular amongst us. But check out whatever works for you.
We know
10
some
frames. We do know some of those, getting older every year. 10 frame, and I'm gonna throw a kicker in there and tell on ourselves. But in a 10 frame box, obviously it fits 10 frames. We run 9. We run 9 frames. The reason we do that is for maneuverability, to be able to work our hives easier. Like we talked about 3 slides ago. We made that decision years ago. And it really is a bonus for the bees, because 1 and 9, what do they do? What do 1 and 9 frames do?
They hold honey.
They hold honey.
They're resource frames.
And so they grow them out really fast.
You know, we were opposed to that, and we
the
still
beginning.
consider ourselves real sticklers for
Yeah.
traditional beekeeping.
Mhm.
But we have found that most of our robbing incidents occur from rupturing honey cells.
Mhm.
And if you've got a good strong hive that's got all 10 frames in there,
It's almost impossible to remove the ones and tens
It is.
without just dripping honey everywhere.
My
And
goodness.
while it's not traditional beekeeping, it is what we do, kind of like what Jamie Ellis said.
Mhm.
This is what I
Works for
do.
us.
Well, this is what we do.
And I can hear Blake in the background. It's what he does too. It works well for people that want to get in, get out, and get it done. Now, top bar. Top bar we're going to throw in here, but that's the picture you see here at the front. So James built this years ago. We kind of have every hive configuration back here. This was a bee yard 2 houses ago. No, we don't move a lot. We lived at this place for a long time. But the back left is a single deep. Then there's a different Warray hive. No, there's a Warray, double deep, triple deep. And then here's the top bar. Top bar is really fun. I think it's an added to a bee yard. There are some that keep nothing but top bar, but for something that's different and just to reach out there, I say go on Texas Bee Supply. Sorry, the Bee Supply. I'll get used to it. TheBeeSupply.com and go by and get you a top bar hive, because these are really awesome. It's a fun way to build bees horizontally. It's not as common. So you might, as we said earlier, you might find it a little more difficult to find a mentor. I do look and plan for those that are out there interested in it. I am really going to focus on getting more articles about top bar beekeeping for the 2023 TBS Monthly Magazine. So watch for those. But finding a mentor might be a little more difficult. You may have to do more reading.
There's some great material on the internet.
There is.
And again, we will be focusing on making that a priority in the future.
Mhm.
You notice that hives that are in that picture, only one of them is chained down.
Yeah.
It's that one. They won't even take it.
And we didn't want it toppling over with some raccoons or
Top
something.
bars are fun, and
In our basic classes, our traditional classes,
Mm-hmm.
we teach learn beekeeping with Langstroth.
Mhm.
And then once you start expanding your knowledge base
Yeah.
and you understand how to keep bees, then move on to the top bars and the other things that are out there. And don't limit yourself, because
Mhm.
beekeeping is supposed to be fun
Mhm.
and not rigid. That 10% comes into play.
That is so true, that part. And lastly, but not least, I've started to not put this on here, nukes, but some people keep bees in nuke boxes. That is, I'm going to say your own little industry when you're doing that. You are doing this for a purpose. You're making bees, you're making queens, you're doing it for a reason, and probably for selling purposes or restocking purposes, because we've kept, like that very first picture on the first slide, we have kept bees overwintered in nukes. And it's a great way to be like a resource colony for you. You can keep bees in nukes, but you're going to have to really manage it. It's not like they're going to just sit there and just be dormant. It's not like the goldfish and the bowl syndrome where they'll only grow to fit their space. That's not bees. Bees will grow.
well, as a new beekeeper, you never only want to have nukes, because you can't learn beekeeping from nukes.
Again, bees want to grow, and those resources, those frames, that brood, all the things in that box, while it's a miniature form of a full-size hive, as it grows, they have to be rotated out.
Yeah.
You have to relieve the population. You have to reduce the honey, and you've got to have some place to take it to. So you start with the more traditional way, and then a nuke is used as an auxiliary or accessory to it.
And that's all we got.
That's the bees in.
That's the bees in. So back to you, Blake.
Great. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Was so educational. That was awesome. Thank you so much. So one of the quick thing, guys, before we let you go for the night, we've got a couple minutes. I forgot to launch a poll. Poll that I'm going to launch this for you guys really quickly before we wrap up. We're trying to think of a new name for this monthly webinar, because we just call it like our monthly webinar. That's probably the least creative name we could possibly come up with. And so we're trying to come up with a name to name this, and we wanted to get your input. So we have some options that we kind of came up with. And so you can just pick, your one or two favorites. It's multiple choice, but maybe pick your one or two favorite. And if you have any creative ideas that aren't on this list, send them our way, because we're trying to think of a creative name that isn't the webinar or the monthly webinar. And so we love to get your help on that, for something that is creative but not too cheesy. So I'm curious to get your insight here. And like I said, if you have any interesting ideas that aren't on here, please let us know, because we love getting your input and your thoughts. While you're filling that out, one other quick thing I want to mention, just as we go through this name change transition, it's going to be slow. And so I'm sure you'll still see some things with Texas Bee Supply on it, and that's fine. We are in no hurry. There's no urgency to switch the name. So we'll still be selling bee suits and hats and t-shirts and stuff like that, that'll still have our Texas Bee Supply logo on them. We're very proud of the Texas Bee Supply name. We're not in any rush to change it. So you'll still see that logo around for quite some time, as we slowly transition. Yeah, I just want to make that note real quick. Okay, so it looks like by far the monthly buzz was the #1 choice. 67% of you said the monthly buzz was your top pick. And then looks like Blake's buzz was second, so at 24%. So super helpful, guys. So I will take that back to our team, and you might see this being renamed as the monthly buzz in the next couple of weeks. So anyway, we'll let you know next month. Don't forget, we'll be sending out a follow-up email. It'll have this recording on it. It'll have links to products and videos we talked about, and then links to the Bee Supply magazine. And with that, guys, I can't wait to see you in February. I may be doing this live from California, and I may be showing you guys some videos of what we're doing in California. But February is the beginning of the bee season across much of the South, and so we'll be diving deep into that. And we will see you in February. Have a great January.